Again,
Hey there, Craig. Quite a day, huh?
yes, unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah. So, thank you. Thank you for managing everything. And
Oh, yeah.
you know, yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
So, anything new on the weekend before the deluge?
No, just it was a good weekend. Yeah. How about you?
Good. Tell you the truth, I can't remember what we did, so it must not have been much. But kind of quiet.
Good.
Yeah. So, I am not prepared for this meeting, but I'll let Diane take the ball.
What's up?
I'm sure Diane is.
Yes. I just confessed that I haven't read everything, so you're gonna have to
Oh.
carry the ball.
I think I can manage. I am so hot right now. Oh my gosh. Wait, are we recording?
Yes, we are.
Oh.
I'll
Okay,
trim
then.
it later. It's fine. All right, Seth is joining now, and then everyone's here.
Okay. Thanks, Seth. Safe.
You're welcome.
Hi, sorry about that.
Hi, that's okay.
The Sethster. All right.
Craig, are you surviving today? Just
Doing
wanted to-
okay. Yeah.
All right, just
Tough
checking.
day, huh?
Yes.
Oh my.
The day that you can accurately predict the weather, though, we can make some real money.
I will be. Yeah, I'll be better. Or gas smells or all that stuff.
Yeah.
Every time I thought I was done, something else came up.
Every time I try to get out, they pull me back in.
Yeah.
All right. I
It
think we're
almost
ready.
became comical at some point. So sorry about that.
All right, let's call the policy committee meeting to order at 4:32. So we have a bunch of policies for rescission. That's the bulk of the agenda. You should have your notes from Shipman and Goodwin. And so we'll start with policy 5100.5, student fundraising activities. If you look at your Shipman and Goodwin notes, they recommend that it be repealed and replaced with their model policy fundraising activities, which we already adopted as policy 5141 back in 2022. So they recommend rescinding this policy. Is there any discussion or questions about 5100.5, student fundraising activities?
Bye-bye.
All right, so we're all in agreement. We can rescind that. Oh, I think we can also do a waive the second read on these as well for the policies for rescission. If anybody has an issue with that for these, just pipe up. All right, so the next policy then is 5120.1, student insurance coverage. Very short, old policy. And Shipman and Goodwin recommend repealing it. It's not mandatory. We can continue to provide insurance options to students without a board policy. And also the policy specifically names an insurance company. So they recommend that we either delete that or rescind the whole policy. So they recommend rescission. Any questions or comments? Did you want to speak at all, Dr. Cook, about student insurance?
No, we recommend rescission too.
Right. Since there are no disagreements on that, we'll move to the next one. Policy 5120.2, reports of accidents. Policy is not mandatory. They recommend rescission. The process for filing accident or incident reports is more appropriately managed through internal procedures. So they recommend rescission. Is there any comments from Dr. Cook or any comments from anyone else? I'm assuming we have some sort of policy, or not policy, but
We have a procedure by which they're reported to KERMA, our liability insurance carrier.
any
So
comments?
I can't imagine there's anything in the existing policy that would not be covered in the current policies or the current procedure, excuse me.
Correct. Right. Yeah, they come into to Zoe and Zoe forwards them on to KERMA in the town.
Great.
Okay, moving on then to policy 5150, employment. They recommend we rescind this policy. It generally tracks statutory requirements and is not necessary. These are all like really old policies that are really short, really don't say a lot.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, and this one too, the high school issues, the working paper's not my office, but yeah, that's fine to do it. Students are made aware through the high school.
Any other comments or discussion about policy 5150? Okay, moving on, policy 5160, gifts to employees. Shipman and Goodwin say policy is not mandatory. They recommend repeal. They recommend the board determine how and if the policy is being enforced, and clarifying terms, etc. And also moving the policy if we wish to keep it, but otherwise they recommend rescission. Dr. Cook, did you want to speak to this at all?
I appreciate the rescission of this one. I think especially it'd be hard for us to determine. I think the 6 of us would probably have a different opinion of what elaborate might mean, you know, for a gift. And so I think that something like this is hard to interpret or certainly enforce, because we don't know how that would work. I think this has changed over time too. I think it's we don't have kids bringing in as much as they used to, I remember. So I think that this would be fine to rescind.
I have
Oh,
seen that change a bit over the years. At one point, there was a dollar amount, and it would come up a lot of times in the school with room parents, whereas the interpretation was just very different. Some would feel everybody could chip in for a gift for the teachers, and then others would feel that if they did chip in, it had to be something that was used in the classroom, and it was kind of a gray area. So is it now we will not have a policy? Is that what we're looking at?
yeah, I mean, I think every school and administrator kind of handled it, you know, according to their school. I remember, you know, when Jacqueline was in elementary school that we always did individual gifts to teachers. That was just what we did. But we also had room parents, and it was never mandatory that anybody gave money, but we did ask for donations if they wanted to give a class gift to a teacher or whatever. And I don't recall anyone ever not giving a gift to a teacher. But that being said, it was always from the class, even if everyone didn't contribute. And I think it's really just best left to, I think parents, you know, I think they want to show their appreciation to teachers and administrators. And I don't think we need a policy. I think if there's something really odd about a gift or whatever, I think the administration would handle it.
There have been occasions, and this is more gray area because it has to do with like clubs and activities and sports rather than like teaching staff or para professionals, but where like an activity group would get together and buy a really elaborate, expensive gift for somebody who's like either a coach or the director of a program, an extracurricular, something like that. I don't know that we necessarily ought to be policing it, but I mean, there are times when, you know, like it involves out of state trips and kids have trouble coming up with money just for the trip alone, let alone, you know, kicking in for a big gift for the person who kind of runs the program.
I've never
So-
seen really extensive or expensive or whatever gifts, but I think in general,
haven't
it's
actually. Yeah.
you have
Yes.
in my experience, I've always noted that anything going on in the schools, whether it was, you know, classroom parents wanting to give a gift to a teacher, like the administration always knew what was going on. And so if there was something going on that I think that they were concerned about, I think that they would address it before it was actually given as a gift. But that's just been my experience. So but again, I think it's something that would be like, how are we going to police this? Like, who's going to be, you know, the judge and jury of who's giving what and what's excessive, and I don't think we need a policy. Also, that's,
You know,
it's
I'm
under,
thinking about it because of what Seth had brought up. That is true. Like, I think there should be some type of limit that we have as a guideline somewhere. Yeah, because like you said, the room parent or the parent on a club or a sport or something can determine what to ask for the donation of all the players or the students.
but with sports,
It
it's
should there
usually goes to the booster clubs. The booster clubs usually handle, any sort of gifts to coaches, et cetera. And I think that's really at the high school level. And this is falling under the 5,000 series, so that would
Right.
be like all students. And I just really think that it's really outside of what we would monitor, because booster clubs are not controlled or in any way governed by Board of Ed or the district. They are outside. Some of them are actual not-for-profits and some are not, but they're all kind of outside our domain, so to speak. So I think that's a separate thing. I think this is more referring to giving a gift of appreciation. I think they're really talking about teachers and paras and that sort of thing. And I have never seen any group ask for excessive amounts or try to exclude anyone who couldn't contribute money. It was always like the whole class gives this, even if everyone didn't contribute. So I really don't think it's an easy thing to try to govern. And I don't think that we really need a student policy on it.
Well, it says gifts to employees, not to teaching staff. And so I mean, I'm kind of torn on this as well. I mean, I'm raising it because it's an opportunity to discuss this matter. Um, and I do absolutely recognize that to one person, something that might be considered elaborate, to another, it might not be considered elaborate. But I also have concerns that, the parents who are in charge of the boosters who want their kids to get more playing time or more face time or a better part or something like that, might go overboard with trying to make sure that there's a good gift rustled up for that.
But gifts from booster clubs are typically they're given from the booster club. They're not from individual parents. They're never, as far as I know, saying like, oh, this is from this specific parent. It's the booster club donates whatever or gives a gift at the banquet, or it's never an individual parent or student.
Thinking perhaps we should have, it is difficult to know what's elaborate. Perhaps we should have a dollar amount that we think is reasonable. That any gifts need to be under this dollar amount. So there isn't like a $2,000 gift going to somebody or something.
I think that is a very difficult thing to say, because what is considered a small amount today might be considered different in 5 or 10 years. We're not making policies for today. We're making policies that last, hopefully, so we don't ever have to do this again. So, we want it to be going forward, looking down, 5, 10, 15 years, where we don't have to revamp this. If you put a dollar amount, you don't know what inflation is going to be like in 15 years. And then what you've put as you're gonna have to keep revisiting this like every couple of years. Oh, let's increase the dollar amount. I just think it's a slippery slope.
Well, you could do a policy that says a dollar amount should be maintained, and that's based on regulation. But again, and then that gets the administration into, what's elaborate and what's not. I don't know. I'm so torn on it.
I also don't want to discourage anyone from showing their appreciation to our staff. This is, I mean, if you read the current policy, it's, policy is not to be interpreted as intending to discourage acts of generosity in unusual situations. Obviously we encourage writing of letters, but I just think that once you start trying to say, well, you can give this, but you can't give that, what is okay today is not going to be the same, parameters as tomorrow. So
I agree. Yeah, it's a sticky wicket. I get it.
Dr.
Um,
Cook, what do other districts do on this? What's your experience been?
I've seen kind of similar language to this in the 4,000 series, but not a dollar amount tied to it. This was a little bit more descriptive, but it also is one that's not really possible to implement. I think working through boosters or even room parents or PTO does kind of take us out of the responsibility, and that's where I haven't seen an issue here. Oftentimes the PTO will give gifts to teachers. That's wonderful, and then it comes from all the school community, and so it's not a specific thing. I think we could remove this one and ask Shipman if there is examples out there that we should consider going forward, but this one's just not enforceable. So, and it's in a
That's
lot of series
understandable.
too.
yeah, it's in
How-
5,000,
What
which
are your
is students.
what are your feelings on gifts that any organization should buy? Like, do you feel there should be no oversight or no limit or anything like that?
I mean, I think it depends on how many people would be, doing this. So I could see a coach that has a huge team retiring and getting a gift that I would consider maybe elaborate, but maybe it's only $20 from each family, like a football coach or a fencing coach or someone, track coach that has 80 kids on the team. If everybody gave $20 for someone's retirement, that would total something nice. I think that's happened before, but again, that's kind of like boosters outside, at a retirement party, things like that. I don't think we have much control over that.
Go ahead,
Galen, that's the same.
Well, let me offer a ridiculous hypothetical that's taken to extremes. How would we today, let's say somebody bought the fencing coach a all expenses paid trip to Aruba. Okay, how would we handle that today, absent this policy? I don't think it's going to come up, but let's just think about it.
Yeah.
That's a
And
good
not all
question.
parents, just one parent.
Well, first
One-
of all, I can't imagine a coach actually accepting something.
Well,
that
no,
was-
or
I think that's a great question, and that is what's on my mind. If any club were to do that, or anything that involves one of our employees, what's our position on that? Are we just
Well, I don't think we can have a position on that because a booster club is an entity that is outside our jurisdiction. They are not Madison Public Schools or district employees. We don't
Right.
have, they are their own, separate club. And we cannot tell them what they can and cannot do unless it's obviously illegal or
no,
whatever.
but this seeks to control the behavior of staff in terms of what they can accept.
This is under the student series, 5,000 series. So it's telling students you can't give extravagant gifts. What you're talking about is either would it be in like the 1,000 series for community, or it would be under staff 4,000 series where staff just can't accept gifts. I mean, that would be a different policy altogether. I mean, it might be similarly worded, but this is in the wrong series.
Right. This restricts gifts from students.
Yeah.
So a student gives a teacher a MacBook. What do we have right now that would, absent this policy, what's the mechanism to prevent that? Other than good sense. I mean, obviously I know it's not going to happen.
I mean, it doesn't actually say what the ramifications are. It just says, don't do it.
There's a code of ethics for teachers that they do for their certification. I think that's what I would use if that scenario came up, but I also appreciate the point that it'd be easier to have a policy that may restrict that.
The receiving of gifts by staff as opposed to the giving of gifts by
Correct.
students.
Right.
So we
Right.
could ask Shipman and Goodwin to look for a 4,000 series that might be more appropriate for our district if it is something that other districts model. If they
Yeah,
have
someone I can
them-
pull a couple from other districts too.
Yeah,
I
I
do-
think that's more appropriate.
Shipman
Yeah,
does not have a model policy in the 5,000s regarding this, nor do they have one in the 4,000s. They do have a code of ethics that mirrors what teachers do sign when they go through certification as a model policy, but they do not have anything specific pertaining to gifts in any of their series.
Galen?
No, I'm just, I'm new at this. I'm just thinking, how much time do we want to spend on hypothetical extremes?
Well, I don't think it's a hypothetical extreme because I've seen it happen before, where an aggregate gift to not someone who's a teacher but not in their teaching role, in a group leader role, let's say, that, or advisor, director, whatever you want to call it, more of a club situation, where a collection was taken up and the aggregate gift was probably over $2,000, and it was not a retirement situation. It was just an annual thank you. And I just wonder if we could have some kind of a rule, or we can consider some kind of a rule. And I know that we might have to revisit it every 5 or 10 years, that says something like, you can have an aggregate gift that's, sizable gift, as long as it is, as long as the requested donation is no more than a maximum of $25 from each student, or something like that.
I would say that I would still recommend rescission of this particular policy because it's in the student series.
Yeah.
Ask Shipman and Goodwin their advice about one in the 4,000 series. But again, I would say you cannot restrict groups that are not district employees, from giving gifts. And if it's outside of the school, if it's their rules outside of, you can't tell them that they can't.
Well, we can control what students give, because you don't want a situation where a student gives a $500 gift and then next thing you know, they're getting an A in the class when they skipped 25% of the classes or something like that. You know what I mean?
I would think
But
that would
I'm not
happen.
saying that happens. Again, I think the way to address this is not in the 5,000 series necessarily, but more like maybe in the 4,000 series, where it would pertain to staff receiving gifts rather than students giving gifts.
All right, so is the committee good with that? We can rescind 5160 and ask Shipman and Goodwin about a 4,000 series, and we'll revisit it as a 4,000 series issue.
Fine with me. I do think we need something under the 4,000 series because I have seen things as Seth did.
Galen?
Yeah, I think rescind this, and then I'll just see what they come back on the 4,000 series. So.
Okay. Making a note. All right, so moving on then to policy 9800, school board member services. So this is a 9,000 series, which falls under our bylaws. Shipman and Goodwin just say the bylaw is not required and they recommend repeal. It's a very short, old policy. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Off with its head.
Maureen?
Looks good. Thank you.
Okay. So I would recommend for the rescission that the 5,000 series policies that we are recommending for rescission, that we would recommend to waive the second read because they're very simple. And then for the 9,000 series, because their bylaws, they require 2/3 vote, we might want to just do the 2 reads on that. You don't need to, but I don't think you need to. I don't remember. But anyway,
That sounds good.
I would say that's reasonable.
Hmm.
Alan?
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so 9800, we're gonna rescind. Policy 9810, new board member orientation handbook. Shipman and Goodwin say, although that orientation of board members is important, the bylaw is not required and we recommend repeal. I don't know if you guys looked at the 2023 if you can read that. It's from Shipman and Goodwin, the 2023 Education Legislation Summary. The very first thing under statutory changes affecting school district operations, they talk about new board member required training. But they don't actually have a new policy on it. And I think it's one of those things, and I talked to Zoe about it, that it's like, if it's a new public act, and Section 3 of the act requires first-time elected board members to complete the prescribed training at a time and in a manner determined by the CSDE, but no later than 1 year after assuming office. So it's something that we have to be compliant with, but we don't necessarily need to have a policy to talk about something that's a required act. So I would say,
We also learned at the delegates assembly that there's no real way that the state has to enforce this either. So it's a recommendation. And there's also a recommendation coming down the pike that goes hand in hand with this, which is for school board member continuing education. Same thing. It's more suggestive than it is, or recommendatory than it is mandatory in practice.
so are we in agreement then, 9810, new board member orientation handbook to rescind? Maureen and Gallon?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, the next one is 9820, board member development opportunities. Bylaws not required, they recommend rescission. In addition, the bylaw describes a retreat involving board members and administrators, teachers, and staff. And they recommend our board retreats be offered for board members to focus on issues such as board roles, goals, and policy, whereas school district operational meetings are held among administrators, teachers, and staff. So they recommend rescission of this policy. Thoughts, questions, comments?
Well, I'd like to think we cover the ground in our normal course of our business meetings and workshops and retreats. I mean, we have teachers before the board. There's pretty good communication, so I'm okay with rescinding it.
Maureen?
That's fine with me. Dr. Cook, are you in agreement with that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Next policy is 9820.1, board member conferences, conventions, and workshops. Shipman and Goodwin say it's not required. They recommend repeal. I mean, we always have a line item to reimburse board members for out-of-pocket expenses, and I don't know that anyone ever actually submits anything. But are there any comments, questions regarding rescission of this policy? Galen?
No, I agree. I think we should rescind it. I guess, I mean, these policies sound more like good recommended practices than policies. And I think as long as we kind of adhere to it, it's nice.
I think most of these were like what Seth had said before, ages ago, about how we used to follow the CABE policies, and they were written in a very different way. And now Shipman and Goodwin are sort of getting rid of the extra.
Yeah. I mean, come to think of it, there's a little bit of a self-interested angle from CABE in writing these policies, but I'll just let that go.
That's true. I would agree with that.
Yeah, there are some. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
There are some good pieces to it, though. In terms of, I think the board does a really good job. Like if Seth attends something, he will type up what was covered in it. The delegate assembly. There was something else recently. I think an online one he attended. I think that's beneficial to the board and good practice. And so I do think that there's some pieces in here that are valuable to kind of good governance of the board. It just makes it very transparent, who's going to what and how it works, and out-of-pocket expenses will be legally permitted. But I think we would want some better language on that, you know, like, we have strict requirements for employees that might go out to a conference, like what they have to do, and it's similar to this, but it's much more updated. So it could be something we could look at some updating as well.
Well, I agree. I think, I mean, that was kind of the intent of my question was, this is good practice. Does it rise to the level of policy? And how do we retain it with, without just kind of, just it's what we always do, or it's what's passed on verbally, right? I mean, is there a place where we could retain good practices? But
And I think that's where the bylaws come in, because that's the only place it would for board members. Whereas like we could do internal procedures, or we can do administrative regs, but those don't apply to board members directly. So I think that this is our area where that would come in. And frankly, we don't have a lot of money in that account. I was surprised how little it is. We pay the CABE dues up front, but there's not much else available. So if a board chair said, I want to go to the national conference in San Diego, we don't have funds for that. So I think that would have to go through the board, and we'd have to talk about that. So it would be helpful for us to have, some procedures for that.
All right,
Yeah,
so
and
then if you want to revamp this bylaw and keep it, looking at what we have now, like I would think that we wouldn't want to establish a calendar, because that's like very formal, like things sort of come up as they come up, and it's and I don't think that it would be, because this is talking about the chair and the superintendent are going to decide which meetings are most promising and approve board members' attendance. I don't think that that's really needed either. I think it would be more like if a board member shows interest in a particular convention or whatever, that they would seek approval or something like that from the superintendent and board chair, and reword it that way.
yeah, I know that we have a line in the budget for professional dues, fees, and stuff like that. And I think that's what our CABE membership comes out of. And I mean, all joking that Galen said about CABE having a self-interest there aside, the fact is we derive a lot of benefit from CABE, because once you pay the membership, you get a lot of benefits, and a lot of these programs are at no additional cost, right? So it does make a lot of sense for us to maybe, like state somewhere in a policy that we're going to maintain our CABE membership. And then that way, there's no question that at budget season that we've got a policy commitment to that, and then possibly also either reimbursement or upfront payment for certain activities related to CABE or NSBA or something that obviously not paying for members' bar tabs or anything like that, but maybe attendance at conferences we ought to have included in a policy, just so
Right,
there's no question.
Why don't we agree to revise this as opposed to rescind, and then we'll finish the rest of the agenda, and if there's time at the end, we'll actually make the changes, and if not, then I'll do it with Zoe, and we'll bring it back either way to the next policy committee meeting. And that way we can finish our agenda. And then, I mean, it's a short policy. It shouldn't be difficult to do the changes, but I just would like to get through the rest of the agenda, if that's okay with everyone.
Yep, agree.
Okay.
It's good. Thanks.
All right, so the next policy then is 9830, board facilities and services. Shipman and Goodwin say it's not required. They recommend rescission.
Oh,
Do we even have a boardroom? Because if we do, I am unaware of it.
I mean, this is a good idea. Again, it's like, is there, Should this be located elsewhere?
I mean, I think if you want an up-to-date policy book, our policy is online, first of all. And is every time we revise it, it's very quickly revised online. So to say that we need to have an up-to-date policy book is sort of outdated. Robert's Rules of Order revised is at central office, except for my copy. And then minutes, again, are stored at central office. But I don't think we have like a specific board room. It's not like, you know, a club room with club chairs you go in and hang out.
Smoking
So-
lunch?
Yeah. So I think it's sort of an outdated bylaw.
We should call this the Z bylaw. For Zoe. She is in Zoe.
It's the whole policy we ask Zoe.
That's right.
That's fair.
Well, we don't have a boardroom, so that absolutely has to come out, but where would all of these things be stored then? I would keep the requirement about the up-to-date policy book, or maybe change it to manual or whatever you call it for online, for the future, because right now it does get uploaded quickly, but if there's staff changes in the future and things like that, maybe it wouldn't be unless it is a policy.
That's required by law. It's part of the records
Okay.
retention law.
Oh, good. Okay, so then that will happen.
I have to
I think
keep
this
every
hasn't
old
been
iteration of it.
This hasn't been touched since 95, so I think it's prior to everything being available on the internet.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, it's
Okay, that-
required that we have the minutes at central office. It's required that we have policies up to date, regulations, all of that. So that's why it's at central office. And I think you guys
Okay.
have hard copies there as well.
Yeah, okay.
So this is sort of like just reiterating it's behind her. So
Yeah.
I think it's just a very old policy. Obviously, if anybody wanted to know where anything was, first of all, we always direct them to the online website, but you know, you just call central office and so we'll
Okay.
point the way.
Yeah, that makes sense then. Thank you.
Great.
All right, so we all in agreement that we can rescind this policy?
Yes.
Yes.
So now we go on to policies for review. The first policy is not 5090.4.2.1 Pledge of Allegiance. So this was updated to conform with the Connecticut General Statute, section 10-230C. And so that's new language. And this is the Shipman and Goodwin model policy for Pledge of Allegiance for consistency and legal compliance. Are there any questions or comments? Everyone's good with the revision?
Yep.
All right. The next policy is 5090.8.1 search and seizure, and this is the regulation, not the policy. So this is from our last policy committee meeting where we discussed the term sex in the policy with regard to the strip search. And so if you review the regulation again, and then you look at what Shipman and Goodwin said about it, they said the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in TLO versus New Jersey explains, among other things, that the search of a student in the school environment must be reasonable. First, a search must be reasonable at its inception. Second, the scope of the search must be reasonably related to the purpose of the search and not excessively intrusive in light of the age and sex of the students involved. That said, the term sex is not legally required. The board may wish to include sex/gender or sex or gender if that is helpful. They do not recommend permitting the student to select the gender of the person conducting the search. As a general principle, the school should act in a manner consistent with the gender identity asserted by the student. And then with regard to the administration using the breathalyzers, that we do not have a passive breathalyzer. A breathalyzer is utilized only if there is suspicion. Only the administrators or police would use the device. Training is based on the directions included with the product, and they work with the Madison Police Department. They calibrate the device before each event and with the required dry gas and dry gas regulator that is made for the model that we have. So those are two separate issues. I don't think we had any more questions regarding the breathalyzers, but the main question here was about the strip search and about the sex of the student versus the sex of the person who is, I guess, witnessing. I'm just looking for the line. So we are looking at line 33, letter D, where it talks about strip searches are prohibited except. And you go down to line 37. During such searches, a member of the school staff shall be present at all times as a witness, and both the police officer conducting the search and the witness shall be of the same sex as the student searched.
Yeah.
So if Shipman and Goodwin says that we don't have to use the word sex, we can use sex or gender or sex/gender. But what we had discussed last time was we didn't know how to determine what the student would be comfortable with if they identify as a gender that they were not born as. So I still feel uncomfortable with this because I don't feel like I can say just because a student identifies as a specific gender that they would be comfortable because they don't currently have the body of that gender with someone of that gender doing the strip search or not being present, I should say, for the strip search, but also the person, the Madison Police Department doing the actual search would be of the same gender as well. So I know what they're saying. And I just am not certain about this, so.
I
Yeah,
feel the same way
it's
you do,
diff-
Diane.
It's difficult because, you know, with the more open prevalence of non-gender specific students, you know, are you able to couple a non-gender specific police officer to conduct the search and also a non-gender specific staff member to witness it? So, I
And it's
mean,
also just such a personal, individual choice of the students. So that makes it tricky.
and at the same time, if you know, it's a catch-22 because if you offer a student the opportunity to have somebody of same gender, and we can't, and that person says I'm gender neutral or I'm gender non-binary, and we can't find a police officer and a staff member to participate or to conduct the search who match that profile, you know, essentially the student can put off the search.
There's
You
nothing
know,
to
like,
stop, there's nothing to stop a staff member from temporarily identifying to whatever gender is necessary for the situation.
I mean, you can say that in a tongue-in-cheek way, but you know, that's asking for a lawsuit.
So I
You
think
know?
if this helps, we talked about this at administrative council. First of all, I had staff members who have been administrators for quite some time who've never been through one. So I just, hopefully that helps set the board at ease a little bit.
Yeah.
We're talking about a situation here where a lot has gone wrong to get to this point. And so we're talking about a situation where there's probably a thought of a weapon, potentially a timed issue where we need to find something out quickly before a student is allowed to go somewhere, or there's kind of like a urgency to it. Most times when students are searched in general, they do the search themselves, you know, so it's okay. Empty your pockets, please, or empty this. Even the police are doing this. So the example that I've kind of come up with, and again, it hadn't been utilized here, was that there's maybe a thought that there was some type of weapon or something really unsafe that was then put, you know, in a private place. And so in those scenarios, the administrator said that, you know, the police would be conducting the search. One of us would be present, but it may not be a situation where we can accommodate the students' choices that, you know, the police are kind of taking over here. If we could, we would, but you you know, I think that that's probably where Shipman's verbiage comes in. And I think that now, having talked that through with them, and hopefully by giving you that example, you feel a little bit more comfortable with it. Like, you know, so we try and accommodate it, but it's so rare and such a major issue that there may be times where we can't, and police are taking over.
Well, if that's the case, can we, hang on a second,
It's just the wording of it though, because it says during such searches, a member of the school staff shall be present at all times as a witness, and both the police officer conducting the search and the witness shall be of the same sex as the student searched. So,
I think maybe the way we handle that, Diane, can we add comma to the greatest extent
feasible.
Feasible?
The police have taken over in the description you gave, Dr. Cook. Would we need a staff person present?
Well, we do, and that's because the whole purpose of this provision is to protect both the police officer and, well, to protect all three: the police officer, the staff member, and the student, right? And because the students are still under our jurisdiction or control, and our responsibility, if this is occurring on school property, we kind of feel, I mean, I think it's a good policy to try to afford the student at least, you know, a guarantee that they're not being subjected to, it's not a guarantee, we should try as best we can to ensure they're not being subjected to an unreasonable search that's conducted in a manner that could, you know, be improper and cause trauma.
So, Dr. Cook, are you recommending then we just keep the language the same?
Yes, I think I'd feel comfortable with that, given our conversations with administrators and Shipman.
But then does it fail as a policy? Because if you can't provide someone, I know we're saying it happens few and far between, it's very unlikely to happen, but as soon as we have a policy that says it has to happen and it doesn't happen in, you know, a month from now, there's a search and a non-gender binary student demands a non-gender binary teacher to be present, and we don't have one to make available for that search, and also the police officer, you know, we're going to get sued because we're in you know, it's evidence of negligence if we don't follow our own policy. So I'm trying to find a way to hopefully take some of that liability aspect out of it by saying to the extent feasible or something like that. Then, you know, we can go and say our policy wants us to have someone of a similar gender identity, but we didn't have one, and we had to go forward with the search because, you know, as the top of the provision says, student, staff, or school property were in immediate danger.
What if we change the word sex to gender? Because
you're still going to have gender non-binary, like folks who say I'm neither or both or something totally different.
I think if we put sex/gender to the extent possible and checked with Shipman to see if that covers, and then I would bring it back. It's administrative reg, you know, but I would bring it back to the committee for next time, or I could update you through email if it's a simple one. If they say that's good, I could just update you from email. If I think it needs more revisions, I can put it on the next policy meeting.
I think that's good. Sex/gender to the extent possible or feasible, or however they want to word it. And then I don't think we would need to, because we don't really vote on regulations, we just sort of advise. So then if you're good with that and they're good with that, it'll just be sent to the board for an FYI, and in case anyone else has any issues with it. And then we can move on.
But I mean, you can see where I'm just trying to give effect.
I think there's no bad answer
liability
here. Yeah, I don't think that, I think if someone's looking for a loophole, they're just gonna find it. I don't think there's any way to make this ironclad in any, with the way that the definitions of things go in today's day and age, there's no way to cover all possible. It's just impossible. Can't do it.
I do appreciate Craig's working through the discussion and scenarios and saying that at that point, a lot will have gone wrong. You know,
Yeah.
time is of the essence. I think that's a valuable contribution.
Oh,
I agree
definitely.
with that.
And I can't imagine this has actually happened very often. I mean,
No,
has
like I
it
said, I
ever
think
happened?
we've had someone here that's been here close to a decade and hadn't participated. So
That's good.
yeah, I think I think it's something that used to happen more often, but has not been an issue recently. I think that we look at things kind of on a big picture, you know, like if a kid had something very small that wasn't harmful, we didn't think it was harmful, there was no threat of, you know, we're not going to do a strip search. Whereas I think, you know, probably, you know, 2 decades ago, they were really aggressive with stuff like that. If it was even, you know, say a small cigarette or something like that, to just, you know, I think that that's something we'd say, okay, you didn't cooperate, we're going to give you discipline regardless.
Yeah.
All right, so if we're all okay with that decision, then we'll move on to the next policy. This is another fun one. Okay, so 9710, school district logo and or motto, and 9720, guidelines for use of district logo, board members' names. And you should have in your packet the two revised versions where 9710 becomes policy 1200 to move it into the 1000 series and out of the bylaw series. And it would be changed to school district logo and mascot as the title of the policy. And it would move then into the community school relations 1000 series. So the two versions are quite different. One is much more specific than the other. And then you should have the current policy of 9710, the current policy of 9720. And then I asked Zoe to include policy 9450 committees because we just passed this revised policy and I wanted you to have it for reference since both of these revisions include reference to policy 9450. So, why don't we look at the longer policy of 1200? I just want to know, like, obviously after you've read it, if the more specific language in this, and again, the intent here is that any change of district logo or mascot is not to be done frequently. If at all, it's just, if it's necessary, we want to have a policy that governs what you would do. And hopefully we won't find ourselves in that situation, but if we do, we will have a policy that will tell us how to handle it. So that's the intent behind this. So does anyone want to start? Galen or Maureen? Again, the similarities between these two, sorry, is that it will take a 2/3 affirmative vote of the membership of the board because we don't want it to be an easy change. And that the board will seek the advice of the superintendent when determining whether or not they need to change the logo and or mascot. And then they both reference policy 9450, which is the making of committees. And it really refers to the very, very first, not paragraph, but under number 1, under 9450, where it talks about special or advisory committees and how the board handles it. Okay. Galen, you want to start?
Thank you. Well, all right. Do we have broad agreement on the things you set forth. So I'll just throw it back at you and Maureen. In other words, it's rare, so the superintendent's input should take a 2/3 vote. And then secondly, as far as I can see, the longer, lengthier version is more specific about the committees. But I mean, I generally give details of the committee. And so,
and I are closer on this than we might have thought before. But when you talk about the school district logo in this bylaw, you're talking about the M with the black background, the circle, and the yes, okay. And then when you talk about mascot, are you talking about tiger in general?
The tiger, the paw, the mascot would be like, what does the school identify as? And it's most closely related to the athletic department.
and then, as you said before, I mean, different sports teams could feel free to make minor modifications with the approval of the AD.
Right. So in a very, very, I would say exactly the same way that Guilford is doing it. So when they changed their motto, I'm sure you're aware, they are the Grizzlies. And so they have this logo, right, of the Grizzly with the claws. And then they took the same logo and like they turned it pink for breast cancer awareness. And then they took the same logo and they have it like in, I think 2 or 3 different iterations. I used to have pictures of it. I didn't think to give you a copy. But then they would have like, you know, the baseball bats with it or the hockey sticks or and it's just a very slight change where it's the exact same mascot. You know, exactly same artistic rendition, the same coloring, except for the October, you know, pink breast cancer awareness one. And then, you know, the only modifications that these separate sports are allowed to do is to change the, you know, the sports equipment that's put in the picture. So, and I don't know, are you guys familiar with what that looks like?
Yes,
Okay.
we've talked about this before, right? And
Oh, yeah.
I
Yes,
thought
we
we
have.
settled on the athletic director would have the authority to make those changes. Is that correct?
Yes, that is
Okay.
correct. So,
And then-
so if you look at the lengthier 1200 policy at the bottom, lines 41 to 43, that's where that specifically talks about that. Minor changes or variations to the mascot, e.g. temporarily changing color to honor an awareness month, adding sport specific icons, etc., will be at the discretion of the athletic director with approval from the superintendent.
Which is the same as what the shorter version says.
And I since I was the guilty culprit who diverted the discussion from Craig. So Craig, you were saying that you and Diane might be closer than.
Yeah, because and she might have said it a little bit different than I was thinking though. So I'm thinking the only time this would come into play is if I bump my head, I wake up and I decide I want to change tigers to pick your wizards. So I want to change it to wizards. So I think I have to then come back through the board, but I think for my athletic logo, which right now predominantly is a paw print and an action tiger, I think that change comes through the committee that's finally meeting in a couple days. And then that committee would do its work. I view them as reporting to the board, but I don't see the board voting on that. I don't see the board voting on the athletic logo even through this policy. I view them, if you were changing it from tigers to something else, then you'd have to vote on it. But I don't think you'd have to vote on.
So I disagree
tiger
with that. So I think because of the current situation that we're in, where we're talking about trademarks and registered trademarks, copyrights, etc., the committee, like under policy 9450, any special or advisory committees, they do the work for the board and then the board acts on it.
And that's what I thought your position was. And so that's what I understood. I think I can ultimately live with that if that's what the board decides. My recommendation is more what I first said. Like if we were planning on changing the district logo or mascot, definitely has to come before the board for a vote. I appreciate the flexibility in terms of, like we said, the paw print gets tennis rackets on it. Doesn't have to come before the board ever. Chris just runs it by me. We are in the process of, I hope, changing the Tiger logo, because that was lifted from somewhere. And so I feel like that needs to change. I feel like that's the committee recommendation will come out. They'll come out with a branding guide as well. So that's my, that's the direction that I've asked him to go in.
Well, one of the other things was that if you look across all the different sports and stuff, there is not even like a single paw print that we use. There's like, I don't know, 10 different iterations of it. And I think, one of the things the AD had talked about doing was making things much more uniform. So,
Yep.
and so that, in essence, he's going to be changing the paw print as well then, and not just the Tiger logo.
I think he'd be coming up with a standard paw print. Because
think
yes, he and I
That's
met
what we want.
in Mr. Salatary's office, and I could see, because TJ's been here, over 10 years, I could see probably 4 different paw prints, 5 different paw prints in his office on different magnets and logos and things like that. So that's what I would like. I think we're missing the boat if we just allow things to change. And I think that there might be a separate thing for football. Football traditionally uses slightly different colors. So I think that they have a little bit different tradition. So I think that would be recognized in the branding. I know, we're not talking about black and gold here, but I think that would be something too that would be brought out in through the committee's work. And then the other thing too is I think we're gonna run the course with our current uniforms. Whatever they have, we have the 3 to 5 year cycle that when that falls in, then we'd use the new ones. We don't have money to buy all new uniforms next year.
Well, speaking of uniforms and colors, does it also make sense to reference not only logo and mascot, but also district colors in this? Because they shouldn't be changing willy-nilly either, other than changing a color for an awareness month, for example, for a specific.
And that was one of the feedback things that I heard from parents, was that they actually would like to see consistent colors across the board, because there's the shades of yellow or gold are all over the place from sport to sport, and it really doesn't look, in my opinion, very good when we're not consistent across the district. We have one athletic department and then many sports, and so in my opinion, and I think that's what I'm trying to get at, is that we have one paw print that we use that does not violate registered trademarks or anything like that, and one Tiger that we use, again, that does not violate registered or copyrighted trademarks. And then
one set of colors.
And then any other variation is up to the AD and the superintendent to approve for whatever use they intend. I guess when I was thinking logo and mascot, the colors were implied in that, in my brain, but maybe it didn't come across that way. And so maybe we do need to be more language specific. And that is we could certainly do that. So go ahead.
I definitely felt that was going to be the committee's work, that they were going to come out with like a branding guide. Here's the numbers. Zoe probably knows them off the top of her head. The number for the gold that we use, the number for the black. Here's where you can go and get your uniforms or t-shirts, or where we recommend things like that. So that kind of branding guide. I just don't think that needs to be in a policy. You shared why you wanted it in a policy, and I totally respect and understand that, but I just don't think that needs to be in a policy. I do think football has always traditionally been a little different. So I think we have to, I would hope we can respect that. It's more of a, what would you call it? More like a Notre Dame type helmet versus a gold helmet.
Couldn't that be in the policy guidelines, that those colors of whatever the football helmet are colors that everybody can use?
It would be in the branding guide that Chris would develop with the committee.
So the branding guide would have those colors plus whatever the other.
Yeah, so every
various
coach would
colors
get
are.
that. Yep.
Yeah, so anybody can use all the same colors. It just might be, there might be two golds is what you're saying, right?
Right, for football or something.
Right. I think that's fine. I'm not following what the difference is between what Dr. Cook's suggesting and Diane, just,
I think the main difference is that the final outcome of the committee that Chris is putting together now, because we decided just go ahead with it, we have to get it done, and this policy is taking a bit of time to get through. And so, you know, the implementation of this policy, we may never see, right? It's for in case of, but we're right now in the act of changing the logos and well, not the district logo, but the mascot and the colors. So I think the main difference is whether or not the board gets to approve it. I think Dr. Cook is saying the AD and he will approve it and we'll get to see it. And I'm saying the board approves it. And I think that's the main difference. Is that right, Dr. Cook?
Yeah. Yes.
So thoughts on that?
I mean, I would think, especially given what's happened in Guilford recently, and with many other districts that had Native American, Indian mascots or logos have gone through, I think there needs to be an authority from the board to establish it as a policy, to establish the authority for the school administration to operate under in setting the branding guidelines. So I do think we need to have a policy. I don't know that the board should, and if we've determined what our mascot and logos are somewhere along the line, or if we're just adopting them as they are now, you know, there's a status quo that we're looking to maintain in some way. I think that the authorizing policy needs to establish that it, you know, it's a tiger, it's generally, you know, black and gold or black and yellow, whatever. And then within that, the branding guidelines can be up to the athletic director with the support of a committee structure and the superintendent's approval. To me, I think there needs to be an authorized, like they call it in, you know, in the law, an authorizing statute. There needs to be an authorizing policy, because if something were to happen down the road, like suddenly, you know, people thought that it was, I don't know, this is an extreme, but, you know, people want to change from a tiger because that's somehow offensive or whatever, that the board would be able to make a change from something offensive, for example. I don't think any way, shape, or form that's going to happen. So again, some of the authority is already there by past precedent. You know, I just think there needs to be authority for a change if there's going to be a major change in, you know, like from a tiger to a fish or something like that. You know, but otherwise, I think it should be at the regulatory level, where, you know, we can say that there needs to be a committee so that there's some kind of committee structure to support the process. But I still think at the end of the day, it's sufficient to allow the athletic director and with the superintendent's approval to govern that.
Galen?
I think, I think under the current administration of Dr. Cook, the lengthier version is superfluous. However, I favor having the lengthier version in case we need to change down the road.
So if you look at the wording of it, the wording in the lengthier version comes from how we were going to make a committee for the naming of a new school, and it's the same sort of language there as opposed to the short version, which is just that we'll form a committee and use policy 9450 to guide the process. So the longer version is much more specific and detailed, and again is modeled after the naming of a school or whatever.
Which
And
itself is based on 9450, right? So
it is, but
is
it's
it
much more
superfluous
specific.
to reference 9450 and also provide that detail here? If you-
No, because we just changed 9450, and if you read the new 9450 that we just passed at our last meeting, it is a much more condensed form and a lot less detailed. So the first paragraph says, the Madison Board of Ed, the board shall act as a committee of the whole on all matters coming before it, except that special advisory committees for the consideration or investigation of certain problems or for the performance of certain board functions may be created by vote of the board. Such special advisory committees shall submit their reports at such regular meetings of the board as may be determined, and when such reports have been submitted and accepted by the board shall be discharged. All special advisory committee reports affecting board policy shall be submitted in writing. A special advisory committee's only authority is to make recommendations to the board regarding matters that have been referred to it, unless the board specifically authorizes otherwise, and such action conforms to the Connecticut General Statutes. Meetings of committees shall be posted in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act. A record shall be maintained by the chairperson of each committee of each meeting, which shall include the names of the committee members in attendance, listing of topics discussed,
Yeah.
and recommendations. And that's pretty much all it says about special committees. So
Well,
that's
that-
why when we did our
yeah.
naming committee thing about new buildings, et cetera, it was very specific.
I think that if we're using the long version, then we probably should have sub bullets underneath the provision that begins at line 24 and ends at line 26. So it says, if the board determines the desire to change the district logo or mascot, the board shall establish a committee consistent with policy number 9450 to expedite and facilitate the board's decision. And it should say, in addition, comma, an ad hoc committee established for this purpose shall, colon, and have those other sections as subsections.
Okay.
I think that would help clarify that 9450 is the dominant structure, but then here's additional detail for this committee, for this purpose.
You got that, Zoe?
Sure.
Thanks. All right, so it sounds like Galen and Maureen and I are, and Seth also want the longer version with the modification to sort of like make it an easier read to follow. So I just want to make a comment that it's 5:42, so I don't know if people need to, go, or if we can wrap this up. Are we gonna bring this back again then with the modification? I think we're gonna have to.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
everyone's nodding yes.
I think we're gonna need to see it one more time. And I think,
Okay.
I've gone back and forth on this, but I think the board probably should see the final logo, just not the individual changes to adding tennis rackets or colors and things like that.
And so, I mean, as the committee is being formed now with the AD, was it discussed between you and him, Dr. Cook, that it would be coming back to the board, or?
Yes. So one of the things, I mean, it goes back to the hiring process for the AD. Chris spoke about his branding process that he used previously. That was very attractive to us as a district. Yes, I had shared with him that I viewed the committee presenting to the board, because I'm really hopeful that we'll come out with something that the community and the board and the athletic teams will be proud of.
And the only other thing I would ask is, do you think we should even put the language in to this policy that says that, because it seems kind of like a duh, but since we have issues now, that we need to respect registered trademarks and copyrights and that sort of thing? I mean, it seems kind of silly to say you need to follow the law, but look.
I think that would be one of those that Shipman told us when we asked them that, and they said, no, you wouldn't need to.
Yeah, you never need to say you have to follow the law.
And yet here we are. So, okay, so we'll bring that one back, and then the 9720 is just kind of tagging along to the 9710. So when we bring it back, we'll talk about the 9720 about getting rid of it. And then whatever else, I think Seth wanted to comment on it. I remember you had something about it. All right, so then, do we have a minute to go back to 9820.1, or should I just work it out with Zoe and bring it back to the next meeting?
I'm fine either way.
I think you can just, you and Zoe can hash it out.
5:45, so I don't want to keep anybody, we're already
Yeah.
running 15 minutes late. Usually we're just an hour, so. And it shouldn't really be that much. Zoe and I can do it in like 2 minutes.
Yeah, to the
Well,
to the
time-
extent feasible or possible or something like that.
No, 9820.1 is the board member
Oh.
conferences, conventions and workshops.
Oh,
we're
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about.
That's the
Sorry.
junket clause, yeah. That's
Yeah, I
the-
mean, there's a lot of it that's just gonna go. It will, condense it and make it all nice and bring it back. All right, so as a summary, the committee has decided to rescind or send forward to the board for rescission policies 5100.5, 5120.1, 5120.2, 5150. And those are to waive the second read and rescind. And then we're also going to rescind and waive the 5160 gifts to employees, but we're going to revisit it as a 4,000 series. We'll talk to Shipman and Goodwin about that. And then bringing forward to the board for review, for rescind and replace 9800 school board member services, 9810. Oh, I'm sorry. No, these are rescissions. My apologies. Rescind 9800, 9810, 9820, 9820.1, and 9830. Sorry, 9820.1 we're going to work on. Am I confusing everyone sufficiently?
No, you
we're
did a
good.
good job. Thank you.
All right, and then for review, 5090.4.2.1 Pledge of Allegiance will be rescind and replace. 5090.8.1 Search and Seizure Regulation. Dr. Cook is going to talk to Shipman and Goodwin about that minor language change and just let us know maybe by email and then as a reg to read at the board level. And then we'll bring back 9710 modified. Is that everything? We're good
Sounds
with that?
good.
Okay.
Good.
Any public comment? All right, then we are done at 5:47.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Great to
you.
hear.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.